Last week, something changed in America. Not the kind of change that makes headlines or breaks the internet. Not the kind of change that politicians argue about on TV or that people post angry comments about online. This change was quiet, invisible. The kind of change that happens so slowly, so carefully, that most people never notice it at all. Children stopped asking why about everything. Adults became more agreeable at work and at home. Families had fewer arguments. People complained less about the government. Traffic moved more smoothly as drivers became more patient and rule-following. On the surface, it looked like America was finally becoming a more peaceful, orderly place. But in a small elementary school in Ohio, one teacher noticed that her third graders had stopped being killers. And that observation would lead 5 ordinary Americans to discover the most terrifying truth in their country's history. The change wasn't natural. It wasn't an accident. And it was just the beginning. Most Americans still don't know what happened to them. They think their calmer thoughts and more compliant behavior are their own choice. They have no idea that their minds are no longer completely their own. This is the story of the few people who figured out the truth before it was too late to fight back. This is the story of what really happened to America in September. Sarah Chen watched her third-grade students with growing worry. For 10 years, she had taught at Millville Elementary in Ohio. She knew how 8-year-olds should act. They should be bouncing in their seats, asking a million questions, and bursting with energy after lunch. But not today, not this week. 22 children sat quietly at their desks. Their hands were folded. Their eyes stared straight ahead. When Sarah asked them to draw pictures of their families, they all used the same colors: blue for dad, pink for mom, yellow for the house. "Where are the dogs?" Sarah asked Tommy Martinez. Last month, he drew his dog Buster in every picture. Tommy looked confused. "Dogs are messy," he said in a flat voice. "Messy things are bad." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Tommy loved that dog more than anything. She knelt beside his desk. "Tommy, don't you remember how Buster licks your face when you get home from school?" The boy's eyes were blank. "I don't like messy things anymore, Mrs. Chen." Across the room, Amy Johnson raised her hand. "Mrs. Chen, can we practice being quiet? Quiet is good." 21 other hands shot up. "Yes, Mrs. Chen. Quiet is good," they said together. Sarah stepped back. In 10 years of teaching, her students had never wanted to be quiet. Ever. During recess, Sarah found Mrs. Patterson, the kindergarten teacher, sitting on a bench. The older woman looked tired and scared. "Janet, are your kids acting strange too?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "They all play the same game now. They line up in perfect rows and march in circles. They don't laugh or run anymore." When I asked little Maria what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said, "Good, just good." "What about their parents? Have they noticed?" "That's the weird part," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "The parents think it's wonderful. Ms. Garcia told me Maria is finally learning to behave. Mr. Thompson said his son Billy is so much easier to manage now." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. Easy to manage? These are children, not robots. After school, parents lined up in their cars to pick up their kids. Sarah watched as children walked to their cars without running or shouting. They got in quietly and put on their seatbelts without being told. Mrs. Williams rolled down her window. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for whatever you're doing in life. Sophie has been an angel all week. She does her homework without complaining and goes to bed on time. She even organized her room without being asked." Sarah forced a smile. "That's nice." As the last car pulled away, a black sedan drove slowly through the parking lot. The driver wore sunglasses and didn't look at the school. But Sarah noticed him talking into a small device near his mouth. Her phone buzzed. It was her brother Marcus. "Sarah, something weird is happening out here on the road." His voice crackled through the speaker. Marcus drove trucks across the country and knew every highway from Ohio to California. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, walking to her car. "I've been seeing military trucks at night. Not regular army trucks. These have no markings, no license plates. They travel in groups of 3 and take back roads. Other truckers are talking about it on the radio." Sarah got in her car and locked the doors. "Where are they going?" That's just it. Nobody knows. But Jim Parker tried to follow some last night in Kansas. They turned into what looked like a construction site. But there was no construction during the day. Just an empty field. Marcus, my students are acting really strange, like someone changed their personalities. The phone was quiet for a moment. Sarah, you need to be careful. Something big is happening and I don't think the government wants people to know about it. Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of Millfield. The town looked normal. People walked their dogs and watered their gardens. But something felt wrong, like the air itself was different. At home, Sarah turned on the local news. The anchor smiled brightly and talked about good weather and school fundraisers. Nothing about strange behavior in children. Nothing about military trucks or construction sites. She switched to national news. More smiling anchors talking about sports and celebrity news. It was as if the whole world was pretending everything was perfectly normal. Sarah made dinner and tried to grade papers, but she couldn't concentrate. Every drawing from her students looked the same. Every story they wrote used similar words. It was like they were all thinking the same thoughts. Her phone rang. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Kim. Sarah, I'm worried about my grandson Danny. He's in your class. What's wrong? He used to love video games and cartoons. Now he says they're too loud and messy. He wants to sit quietly and think good thoughts. Those were his exact words. Think good thoughts. What 8-year-old talks like that? Sarah looked out her window at Mrs. Kim's house. Has he been having any strange dreams? How did you know? He's been having the same dream every night this week. He says a nice lady talks to him and teaches him how to be better. He wakes up so calm and different. Sarah's hands shook. Mrs. Kim, other children are having similar dreams. I think we need to... A car door slammed outside. Sarah peeked through her curtain and saw the same black sedan from school parked across the street. The driver was still inside, watching her house.
Mrs. Kim, I have to go. Can you come over tomorrow? We need to talk about this more.
After hanging up, Sarah turned off all her lights and watched the car. It sat there for 2 hours before driving away. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought about her students' blank faces and their perfectly folded hands. She thought about military trucks with no markings and construction sites that disappeared during the day. At 3 in the morning, Sarah got up and checked her email. Mixed in with parent messages and school announcements was something strange. The sender was listed as a friend, and the subject line was empty. The message said, "You're right to be worried. Check your car tomorrow morning. Look under the passenger seat. Trust no one at school. They're listening." Sarah deleted the email immediately, then wondered if she should have. She crept to her window and looked outside. The street was empty, but she felt like someone was still watching. The next morning, Sarah walked to her car with shaking hands. She opened the passenger door and felt under the seat. Her fingers touched something that shouldn't be there, a small metal box with wires. She pulled it out carefully. It looked like some kind of tracking device. Someone had been following her every move. As she stared at the device, a piece of paper fell from her car door handle. It was an official-looking document, with a government seal at the top. Most of it was covered in black ink, but she could read a few words: Phase 3 complete, and subject response, optimal. At the bottom, in small print, she could make out, Millfield Elementary, test site. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her school was a test site. Her students were test subjects. And Phase 3 was complete. But Phase 3 of what? And what came next? She looked around the empty parking lot, clutching the document. Somewhere out there, people in black sedans and unmarked trucks were watching and waiting. They had done something to the children of Millfield, and nobody seemed to notice or care, except Sarah. And now they knew she was watching too. The paper trembled in her hands as she realized the horrible truth. This was just the beginning. 300 miles away, Captain Joe Brennan pulled his lobster boat Mary Catherine into Portland Harbor as the sun painted the Maine coast orange and pink. He had been fishing these waters for 30 years, but today felt different. Wrong. His GPS had been acting up all week. The device that always pointed him home now spun in circles. Yesterday, it told him he was in the middle of Kansas. This morning, it showed him somewhere in Canada. Dad, The radio's doing that thing again, called his crew member Pete Santos. The young man was fiddling with their marine radio, which crackled with strange sounds instead of the usual Coast Guard reports. Joe frowned and took the radio. Instead of normal chatter from other boats, he heard clicking sounds and high-pitched beeps. It sounded almost like a computer trying to talk. "Pete, how long has it been doing this?" "Started Monday. Same day we found those weird fish." Joe remembered. They had pulled up their nets to find fish swimming in perfect circles. Hundreds of them, all moving the same way. In 30 years of fishing, he had never seen anything like it. "Captain Brennan." A Coast Guard boat approached them fast. Officer Martinez waved them over. "You need to stay away from grid section 7C from now on." "What's in 7C?" Joe asked. That section had some of his best lobster traps. Classified training exercises. Could be dangerous for civilian boats. Joe knew every Coast Guard officer in Portland. Martinez had never talked about classified anything before. The man looked nervous, like he was reading from a script. "How long will these exercises last?" "Indefinite," Martinez said quickly. "Also, if you see any unusual marine life behavior, don't report it. We're handling all wildlife issues internally now." The Coast Guard boat sped away before Joe could ask more questions. Back at the dock, Joe found his daughter Emma waiting for him. At 20, she was studying marine biology at the University of Maine. She held a small glass bottle filled with seawater. "Dad, I need to show you something scary," Emma said. Her face was pale and worried. "I tested that water sample you gave me from Monday. Look at this." She pulled out her phone and showed him a microscopic image. Tiny silver particles floated in the water like metal dust. "What are those?" Joe asked. "I don't know. They're not in any of my textbooks. They're not natural, Dad. Someone put them in the ocean." Joe felt cold despite the warm September air. "How much of the ocean?" "I tested samples from different areas. The particles are everywhere within 50 miles of shore. But here's the really weird part. They seem to be moving on purpose. Watch." Emma showed him another video. The silver particles were forming patterns, like they were following invisible instructions. I tried to show Professor Williams, but he told me to focus on my regular studies. He said the particles were probably just pollution and not to worry about it. "Since when does Professor Williams not care about ocean pollution?" Joe asked. Emma's professor had spent his whole career studying how humans damage the sea. "That's what I thought. So I called the Environmental Protection Agency. They said they weren't taking reports about ocean particles right now." Father and daughter stared at each other. Joe thought about his spinning GPS and the strange radio sounds. Emma thought about the silver particles that moved like they were alive. "Emma, I think we need to be very careful about who we talk to about this." Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Sarah sat in her empty classroom after school. She had hidden the government document in her desk drawer, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Phase 3 complete kept running through her mind. She opened her laptop and searched for government mind control experiments. Most results talked about old CIA programs from the 1960s. She found stories about MKUltra and other projects where the government tested drugs on people without telling them. But those programs were supposed to be shut down decades ago. Sarah tried searching for Phase 3 complete, but found nothing. She searched for Test Site 2047 and got no results. It was like the document didn't exist in the digital world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Call me. Use the old landline at school. Not your cell phone." Sarah walked to the office and used the school's landline to call her brother's truck stop payphone. "Sarah, I found something big," Marcus said. His voice was excited and scared. "Remember those military trucks I told you about? I followed them last night." "Marcus, that's dangerous." "I stayed way back. They led me to a construction site outside Topeka, Kansas. But get this, during the day, it looks like a normal farm field. At night, they bring in equipment and work on something underground." Sarah gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of equipment?" "Satellite dishes. Big ones. And cables. Lots of cables going deep into the ground. I took pictures with an old camera. Not digital. Film. Can't be hacked or erased remotely." "Did you see any workers?" "Yeah, but they weren't regular construction guys. They moved like military." "And Sarah, They were all wearing the same kind of headset. Like they were all listening to the same instructions. Sarah thought about her students' identical behavior. Marcus, I found a government document that says my school is some kind of test site. It mentioned Phase 3 being complete. The phone was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, what if they're testing something on kids first? Kids' brains change easier than adult brains. The thought made Sarah sick. But testing what? I don't know, but other truckers are reporting weird stuff too. Jim saw work crews installing new cell phone towers in the middle of nowhere. Betty found construction sites near schools in 3 different states. It's all connected somehow. After hanging up, Sarah sat alone in the quiet school. Through the windows, she could see parents picking up children from after-school programs. The kids walked to their cars in straight lines. No pushing or laughing or running. She opened her desk drawer and looked at the document again. This time, she noticed something she had missed before. At the very bottom, in tiny letters, it said, "Next phase authorization pending. Project Mindbridge." Project Mindbridge. Sarah wrote the words on a scrap of paper and hid it in her wallet. That evening, Emma Brennan sat in her dorm room, staring at more test results. The silver particles in the ocean water were definitely artificial, but more importantly, they seemed to be transmitting some kind of signal. She had borrowed advanced equipment from the physics lab to test this theory. Sure enough, the particles were sending out radio waves at a very specific frequency. The same frequency that marine animals use to navigate. Emma thought about the fish swimming in circles. What if the particles were confusing sea creatures on purpose? But why would anyone want to do that? She tried calling her marine biology professor at home, but got a message saying his number was disconnected. She tried emailing him, but the email bounced back as undelivered. Professor Williams had worked at the university for 20 years. His phone number and email couldn't just disappear overnight. Emma grabbed her jacket and walked across campus to the marine biology building. The professor's office was dark, but the door was unlocked. Inside, she found something that made her heart race. The office was completely empty. No books, no papers, no computer, nothing. Like Professor Williams had never existed. But taped to the inside of his desk drawer was a small note. Emma, trust no one at the university. The ocean samples are more important than you know. Find others who are asking questions. Pete. Emma folded the note and put it in her pocket. As she left the building, she noticed a black car parked nearby with its engine running. When she walked toward her dorm, the car followed her slowly. She ducked into the library and watched through the window. The car waited outside for an hour before driving away. Back in her room, Emma searched online for ocean particles and marine behavior changes. Most results led to broken links or error messages, but she found one forum where people were discussing strange things happening near coastlines. A fisherman in California wrote about his compass spinning wildly. A marine biologist in Florida reported fish behaving oddly, but said his research funding was cut when he tried to investigate. A Coast Guard officer in Washington state mentioned restricted ocean areas that didn't exist on any official maps. Emma created an anonymous account and posted anyone else finding strange particles in ocean water near Maine. Within minutes, she got a private message from someone called Truth Seeker OH. Not ocean, but something's wrong with kids in my town. They all act the same now. Think we're dealing with the same people. Emma stared at the message. Kids acting the same? How could that be connected to ocean particles? She wrote back, "What do you mean about kids? 3rd graders in my school changed overnight. Like someone reprogrammed them. Found government document mentioning Phase 3. Think they're testing something." Emma's hands shook as she typed. "My dad's GPS and radio equipment are malfunctioning. Coast Guard declared ocean areas off limits for no reason. Found particles in water that move in patterns. We need to talk. Others are noticing things too. Can you use encrypted messaging?" Emma thought about Professor Williams' empty office and the black car that had followed her. Whatever was happening, it was big enough that people were disappearing and being watched. She downloaded an encrypted messaging app and created a secure account. Within an hour, she was connected to a small group of people across the country who had all noticed something wrong. Truth Seeker OH was a teacher in Ohio named Sarah. A truck driver named Marcus reported military construction sites. Each person had found a different piece of the same puzzle. But as Emma read their messages, She realized they were all asking the same question. If this was just the beginning, what was coming next? Outside her dorm window, the black car had returned. This time, there were two of them. Emma closed her laptop and turned off the lights. She peeked through the curtain and saw men in dark suits standing near the cars. One of them was talking into a small device, just like the man Sarah had seen at her school. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Sarah. "Are you safe? Something big is happening." Emma typed back, "Being watched. 2 cars outside my dorm. What did you find?" "My brother Marcus discovered construction sites across multiple states, all near schools or populated areas. I think they're building some kind of network." Emma looked at the men outside again. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They wanted her to know she was being watched. She grabbed her backpack and climbed out her window onto the fire escape. The dorm was only 3 floors up, and she had done this before to sneak out for late-night study sessions at the library. As she climbed down, she could hear car doors slamming. They had seen her. Emma ran across campus, staying in the shadows between buildings. She knew every shortcut from 4 years of college life. Behind her, she could hear footsteps and voices calling out positions like they were soldiers. She made it to the computer lab in the basement of the library. It was always open all night for students. Emma logged into a public computer and sent an urgent message to the group. "They're coming for me. Need help." A new person joined their encrypted chat. The username was Phoenix Tech, and the message was simple. "I can help. I know what they're doing." Emma typed, "Who are you?" "Dr. Raj Patel. I work for a tech company in Arizona. I monitor internet traffic for security threats. For the past month, I've been tracking massive data transfers happening every night between government servers in unknown locations." Sarah joined the conversation. "What kind of data?" "Instructions. Commands. All encrypted with military-grade security. But I managed to decode some of it. They're sending signals to devices across the country. Smartphones, tablets, smart TVs, even some car navigation systems." Emma felt her heart racing. What kind of signals? That's the scary part. The signals aren't random. They're specifically designed to affect brainwave patterns. I've seen this technology before in medical research papers about treating depression and PTSD. Marcus, the truck driver, added to the chat. "I've been mapping those construction sites I found. They're all exactly 50 miles apart, forming a grid pattern across the entire United States. Like they're trying to cover every square mile of the country." Emma thought about the silver particles in the ocean and how they moved in patterns. "The ocean particles I found, they're transmitting signals too. What if the underwater signals connect to the land-based network?" Raj typed quickly. "That would make sense. Ocean coverage plus land coverage equals total coverage. No place to hide from whatever they're broadcasting." Sarah added, "My students started changing after they began having identical dreams. Dreams about a nice lady teaching them better ways to think. What if those signals can reach people while they sleep?" Emma heard footsteps in the hallway above. Security guards were searching the library. She typed, "I have to move. They're searching for me." Raj responded, "Wait. Before you go, you need to know something else I discovered. This isn't the first time they've tested this technology. I found similar data patterns from other countries over the past 5 years. Countries where the population suddenly became more manageable." "What do you mean manageable?" Sarah asked. "Less protests. Fewer people questioning government decisions. More compliance with authority. It happened gradually, so nobody noticed. But if you look at the data, it's clear that something changed how those populations think and act." Emma's blood turned cold. "Are you saying they've already done this to other countries?" "Yes. And it worked. America is just the biggest test yet." Marcus wrote, "How do we stop it? First, we need to understand how big this network really is. I'm going to risk everything and do a deep scan of their system tonight. If I can map their entire operation, maybe we can find weak points." Sarah added, "I'm going to document everything happening to my students. We need proof that this is really affecting children's minds." Emma heard voices getting closer. "I have to go. But I'll keep monitoring the ocean signals. If they're part of the network, maybe we can track them back to their source." She logged out and slipped deeper into the library basement. There was a tunnel system that connected to the old heating plant. Emma had explored it during her freshman year. As she crawled through the narrow tunnel, she thought about what Raj had said. Other countries had already been changed. Their people didn't even know it had happened to them. What if it was already too late for America? Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Arizona, Dr. Raj Patel sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home. His company, Dataflow Security, monitored internet traffic for major corporations and some government agencies. But what he was about to do could get him arrested or worse. He pulled up the network scanning software he had designed for legitimate security work. Tonight, he would use it to break into the very government systems his company was supposed to protect. The first scan revealed what he already knew. Massive data transfers happening every night at exactly 3 a.m. Eastern Time. But when he dug deeper, he found something that made his hands shake. The transfers weren't just going to unknown locations. They were coming back with response data. Like the system was checking to see if the signals had worked. Raj opened the response files and saw spreadsheets full of numbers. Location codes, population counts, and something labeled compliance percentage. He cross-referenced the location codes with his map of America. Every code matched a city or town where Marcus had reported construction sites or where other group members had noticed strange behavior. The compliance percentages were terrifying. Most locations showed 60–80% compliance rates, but newer locations showed lower numbers. Places where the network had been active longer had higher percentages of people who were compliant. Millfield, Ohio, Sarah's town, showed 85% compliance. Portland, Maine, Emma's area, showed 72% compliance. Phoenix, Arizona, his own city, showed 43% compliance. Raj realized he was looking at a real-time map of how successfully they were controlling the American population, and the numbers were going up every day. But the most frightening part was a folder labeled Phase 4 Preparation. Inside were target lists of people who showed resistance patterns, people who asked too many questions, who noticed things others missed, who might cause problems for the program. Raj's name was on the list. So was Sarah's. So was Emma's. They were all marked for priority neutralization. His computer screen suddenly went black. Then words appeared in green text. Dr. Patel, you are accessing classified information without authorization. Remain at your workstation. Security personnel are en route to your location. Raj's heart pounded. They had been monitoring his computer the whole time. He had walked right into a trap. He grabbed his backup hard drives and ran for the emergency stairs. Behind him, he could hear the elevator doors opening and heavy footsteps in the hallway. As he reached the parking garage, Raj sent one last message to the group. They know about us. I found their target list. We're all marked for elimination. The system is bigger than we thought. They're controlling the population percentages in real time. Phase 4 starts soon. Don't trust any devices connected to the internet. They're watching everything. He threw his phone in a trash can and got in his car. In his rearview mirror, he saw men in black suits running down the stairwell. Raj had worked in computer security for 15 years, but he had never been on the wrong side of a manhunt before. As he drove through the empty Phoenix streets, he realized that everything he had believed about privacy and freedom in America was a lie. The government wasn't just watching people anymore. They were actively changing how people think and feel. And most Marcans had no idea what was happening to them. His car radio crackled to life, even though he hadn't turned it on. A calm, pleasant voice filled the car. Dr. Patel, there's no need to run. We can help you understand why this technology is necessary for America's future. Please return to your office for a friendly conversation. Raj turned off the radio, but the voice continued. It was coming from his car's built-in navigation system, then from his smartwatch, then from every electronic device in his car. Dr. Patel, resistance will only make this harder for you and your family. We know where your wife works. We know where your children go to school. Please be reasonable. Raj pulled over and ripped every electronic device out of his car. The voice finally stopped, but the silence was almost worse. It meant they were tracking him by other means. As he sat on the side of the dark highway, Raj realized the horrible truth. If they could reach him through every connected device, they could reach everyone in America the same way. The network wasn't just built, it was already active, and it was watching them all. In the mountains of rural Montana, Maria Santos woke to the sound of helicopters. She rolled out of her sleeping bag and crawled to the window of her small cabin. 3 black helicopters flew low over the valley. their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Maria had left the military 2 years ago, after seeing classified operations that made her sick. She couldn't stop the nightmares about what her own government was doing to innocent people. So she came here, to a community of people who lived off the grid. No internet, no cell phones, no smart devices, just basic radios and old-fashioned ways of living. But even here, something was wrong. The wildlife had been acting strange for weeks. Deer walked in straight lines instead of their usual zigzag patterns. Birds flew in perfect formations like military jets. Even the wolves howled at exactly the same time each night. Maria grabbed her old military radio and tuned to frequencies she wasn't supposed to know about. As a former communist specialist, she had memorized channels the government used for secret operations. What she heard made her blood freeze. Control. This is Eagle 7. Grid Montana 47 shows zero compliance. Recommend immediate deployment of mobile units. Confirmed, Eagle 7. Mobile units are en route. Estimated deployment in 6 hours. Copy that. What about the civilians? Standard protocol. Offer them relocation to compliance zones. If they refuse, move to containment procedures. Maria turned off the radio and sat in the darkness. Compliance zones. Containment procedures. She knew what those words meant from her military days. It was the language they used when dealing with people who wouldn't cooperate. She thought about her neighbors in the off-grid community. Old Pete, who grew vegetables for everyone. Sarah May, who taught the children how to read using real books instead of computers. Tom, who fixed everyone's solar panels and water pumps. They were all about to be contained for the crime of living free. Maria packed her gear and hiked to the community center. She needed to warn everyone, but she also needed to understand what was really happening across America. At the center, she set up her advanced radio equipment in the basement. This wasn't just any radio, it was military-grade gear she had borrowed when she left the service. It could pick up signals from hundreds of miles away. She spent 3 hours scanning frequencies, listening to coded messages between government units. Slowly, a picture formed of something massive and terrifying. Teams were deployed across the country, checking compliance rates in different areas. Places with high compliance were left alone. Places with low compliance were being upgraded with more powerful signal equipment. But the most chilling discovery came when she tuned into a channel labeled Mindbridge Command. Phase 4 authorization confirmed. Begin targeted individual protocols. Priority targets are in custody or being pursued. Proceed with timeline acceleration. Maria wrote down every word. Phase 4. Targeted individual protocols. Timeline acceleration. She kept listening and heard names and locations. Dr. Raj Patel in Phoenix. Vehicle tracking confirmed. Emma Brennan in Maine. Campus security coordinating search. Sarah Chen in Ohio. Workplace surveillance active. These people were being hunted. But why? Maria tuned to another frequency and heard something that made her understand. It was a recording being broadcast to field units, a training message about resistance indicators. Subjects showing resistance typically display heightened awareness of environmental changes. They notice patterns others miss. They ask questions about authority. They form connections with other resistant individuals. These subjects pose a threat to operational success and must be neutralized before they can organize broader resistance movements. Maria turned off the radio and stared at her notes. The government was hunting people who were naturally immune to whatever they were doing to control the population. People like her. People who asked questions and noticed things. She thought about the encrypted messaging app she had heard about on scanner frequencies. Government units were trying to track people using it, which meant those people were fighting back. Maria powered up an old laptop that had never been connected to the internet. She drove to the nearest town and used the library's Wi-Fi to download the encrypted messaging software. Within an hour, she had found the group. She read their messages with growing amazement and fear. A teacher who noticed children's personalities changing. A fisherman's daughter who found artificial particles in the ocean. A computer expert who discovered compliance percentages for the entire country. These people were pieces of the same puzzle she was putting together from military radio chatter. Maria typed her first message to the group. I'm a former military communications specialist. I've been monitoring government radio traffic. You're all in danger. They have teams hunting you right now. But I also know something else. Phase 4 starts in 72 hours, and it involves activating all nodes nationwide. Sarah responded immediately. What does that mean? I'm not sure, but I heard them mention something called full deployment. Based on what I've learned about your situations, I think they're planning to activate every signal transmitter in the country at the same time. Emma joined the conversation. I'm hiding in the woods behind my campus. They have dogs searching for me now. But I managed to get more ocean water samples before I ran. The particles are definitely getting stronger, Raj wrote. I'm in a truck stop outside Phoenix. Had to abandon my car because they were tracking it, but I downloaded their entire compliance database before they caught me. I can share the data if you have secure storage. Marcus, the truck driver, added. I'm seeing military checkpoints being set up on major highways. They're not stopping regular traffic yet, but they're taking pictures of every license plate. Maria looked at her notes from the radio intercepts. According to their communications, they're moving to something called targeted individual protocols first. That means they're going to try to capture or neutralize anyone who might organize resistance. Then they'll activate the full network. Sarah asked, how do we stop them? Maria had spent 2 years trying to forget her military training, but now she was glad she remembered it. First, we need to understand exactly what happens when they activate all the nodes. Second, we need to find a way to communicate that they can't monitor. Third, we need to warn as many people as possible. Emma wrote. But who would believe us? Most people already think everything is fine. That's the problem, Maria replied. The system is designed so that people who are affected don't realize they've been changed. They think their new thoughts and feelings are their own choice. She thought about her neighbors in the off-grid community. They would believe her because they had chosen to live free of technology's influence. But what about everyone else? Maria's radio crackled to life with an emergency broadcast. All units, priority targets are attempting to coordinate resistance. Monitor all communication channels. Prepare for early deployment if necessary. She typed quickly. They know we're talking to each other. We need to meet in person somewhere they can't monitor us electronically. I know a place in Montana where there's no cell service and no internet. But you'll have to get here without using any trackable transportation. Raj responded. That's going to be nearly impossible. They're tracking credit cards, cell phones, even traffic cameras now. Maria thought about the skills her military training had given her. Moving undetected, communicating without detection, surviving off the grid. I can help with that. I know how to move people without leaving electronic traces. But we need to hurry. Based on what I'm hearing on the radio, they're accelerating their timeline because of us. Sarah wrote. What's the worst that could happen if we don't stop them? Maria looked out the library window at the small Montana town. People walked down the sidewalk like normal, but something in their movements seemed different from 2 months ago. More orderly, less random, like they were all following invisible instructions. She typed her response. Based on what I've seen in other operations, once they activate the full network, resistance becomes nearly impossible. People lose the ability to think independently. They become completely manageable. How long would that take? Emma asked. Maria checked her notes from the radio intercepts. According to their communications, full activation affects 95% of the population within 48 hours. The remaining 5% either go into hiding or are dealt with through other means. The group chat went quiet for several minutes. Maria could imagine them all sitting in their hiding places, trying to process what she had just told them. Finally, Sarah typed, so we have 72 hours to save America's ability to think freely? Maria looked at her reflection in the library computer screen. 2 years ago, she had run away from the military because she couldn't handle the truth about what her government was doing. Now she was the only one with the knowledge and skills to fight back. Yes, she typed. 72 hours to save everyone's mind. But first, we had to survive the next 24 hours. They're closing the net around all of us. She logged out and erased her digital footprints using techniques she had learned in military intelligence training. Outside, she could hear helicopters in the distance, getting closer. Maria shouldered her pack and walked into the Montana wilderness. Somewhere out there, her new allies were running for their lives. In 72 hours, the government would flip a switch and turn America into a nation of people who couldn't think for themselves. Unless a teacher, a fisherman's daughter, a computer expert, a truck driver, and a former soldier could find a way to stop them. The hunt was on. and the future of human freedom was at stake. In a sterile office building in Washington, D.C., David Kim sat at his desk staring at a computer screen that showed him nothing. For 15 years, he had been an intelligence analyst for the National Security Agency. His job was to find threats to America's safety. But now, David was the threat. 3 weeks ago, his security clearance had been reduced without explanation. Files he used to access every day were suddenly marked classified, need to know only. When he asked his supervisor why, he was told to focus on his assigned work and stop asking questions. The problem was, David's assigned work had become meaningless. Instead of analyzing real threats, he was now reviewing tourist websites and restaurant reviews. It was busy work designed to keep him out of important systems. David knew why his clearance had been cut. He had been asking the wrong questions about Project Mindbridge. 2 months ago, he had noticed unusual data patterns in domestic communication monitoring. American citizens were being tracked and analyzed in ways that violated every privacy law in the country. When David tried to report this to his supervisors, they told him the monitoring was part of a classified mental health initiative. But David had read the real files before his clearance was reduced. Project Mindbridge wasn't helping people with mental health problems. It was creating mental health problems. Then it was solving them by changing how people think. Now sitting at his useless computer, David watched his colleagues work on projects he couldn't access. But he had learned to read their body language over 15 years of working together. They looked scared. Agent Martinez, who used to joke around during coffee breaks, now sat rigid at her desk and rarely spoke to anyone. Dr. Peterson, who had always been eager to share his research discoveries, kept his work hidden and jumped whenever someone walked behind him. The office felt like everyone was being watched. Because they were. David had noticed new security cameras installed in places where they had never been before. The break rooms, the hallways, even the bathroom entrances. And the cameras weren't the usual government-issued equipment. They were smaller, more advanced, and they tracked movement in ways that seemed almost intelligent. During his lunch break, David walked outside to get fresh air. The September weather in Washington was perfect, but the city felt wrong. People on the sidewalks moved differently than they had a few months ago. More orderly, less chaotic, like everyone had agreed on the same walking speed and direction. He sat on a bench and watched traffic. Even the drivers seemed more compliant. No honking horns. No aggressive lane changes. Everyone followed the rules perfectly. It should have felt peaceful. But it was terrifying. David's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Don't react, just listen. Walk to the coffee shop on 14th Street in exactly 10 minutes. Order a large coffee with cream. Sit at the table by the window. Leave your phone on the bench when you go. David looked around but couldn't see anyone watching him. The message could be a trap, but staying at his NSA desk wasn't safe either. He had seen what happened to other employees who asked too many questions. They were transferred to other departments, or they took early retirement, or they simply stopped showing up to work. He left his phone on the bench and walked to the coffee shop. At the window table, a middle-aged woman in a business suit was already waiting. She had short gray hair and kind eyes, but her hands shook slightly as she held her coffee cup. Dr. Kim, I'm Janet Morrison. I used to work at the CDC until last week. David sat down carefully. Used to work? I was fired for asking questions about unusual medical reports. Children across the country showing identical behavioral changes. Adults reporting memory problems and difficulty concentrating. All happening at the same time in different areas. What kind of behavioral changes? Janet opened a folder and showed him photographs. Children sitting in perfect rows in classrooms. Teenagers walking in straight lines through shopping malls. Adults standing in orderly groups at bus stops. They all look so calm, David said. That's the problem. Children shouldn't be this calm. Teenagers shouldn't walk in straight lines. Adults shouldn't stand in perfect formation while waiting for buses. This isn't normal human behavior. David thought about the people he had seen on the streets. How widespread is this? That's what I was trying to find out when they fired me. But before I lost access to CDC databases, I mapped the reports. It started in small towns and rural areas, places where people might not notice gradual changes. Then it spread to suburbs and smaller cities. What about major metropolitan areas? The reports show lower rates of behavioral changes in big cities, but the rates are climbing every week. Janet pulled out another document. This is what got me fired. I found a correlation between the behavioral changes and something called signal strength measurements in classified government communications. David recognized the document format. It was the same type of classified report he used to have access to at the NSA. Where did you get this? A friend who still works in the government. Someone who's afraid of what's happening but doesn't want to end up like me. David read the document quickly. It contained maps showing signal coverage across the United States. The coverage patterns matched exactly with Janet's maps of behavioral changes. Dr. Morrison, I work for the NSA. I've been tracking unusual domestic surveillance activities. I think we're looking at the same operation from different angles. Janet leaned forward. What kind of surveillance? Mass monitoring of communication patterns. Analysis of social media posts for attitude indicators. Tracking of people who express skepticism about government policies. All under the cover of mental health research. Mental health research? David lowered his voice. They're not just watching people's behavior, they're changing it. The technology was developed to help soldiers with PTSD, but it's been weaponized to control civilian populations. Janet's face went pale. How many people know about this? Not many. Most of my colleagues either don't have access to the classified files, or they're too scared to ask questions. The few people who did ask questions have been transferred or fired. Or worse, Janet said quietly. My friend who gave me these documents said that some researchers have had accidents or health emergencies. People who got too close to the truth. David felt a chill down his spine. What do you mean? Dr. Sarah Williams at the University of Maine. She was studying environmental factors affecting marine life behavior. She found artificial particles in ocean water and tried to report it. Her lab was shut down. Her research was confiscated and she died in a car accident 2 days later. That could be a coincidence. Dr. Michael Chen in California. He noticed identical behavioral patterns in children across multiple school districts. He tried to publish his research. His house burned down with him inside. Janet showed David a list of names. 12 researchers in the past 6 months. All working on aspects of the same puzzle. All dead or missing. David stared at the list. These weren't random accidents. They were systematic elimination of anyone who got too close to understanding Project Mindbridge. Dr. Morrison, I think we're both in danger just by talking about this. I know. But I have children, Dr. Kim. Grandchildren. I can't stand by and watch while someone steals their ability to think freely. David thought about his own family. His wife and teenage daughter. Were they already affected? Had their personalities changed so gradually that he hadn't noticed? What can we do? Janet pulled out a secure phone. There's a group of people who have discovered different pieces of this puzzle. A teacher in Ohio. A fisherman's daughter in Maine. A computer expert in Arizona. They're being hunted right now. But they're still fighting. How do you know about them? The same friend who gave me the documents. He's been monitoring government communications about priority targets. These people are on a list for immediate capture or elimination. David felt sick. The government is hunting American citizens? Citizens who refuse to be controlled. Citizens who ask questions. Citizens like us. Janet's secure phone buzzed. She read the message and her face went white. We need to leave. Now. My friend just sent a warning. NSA teams are moving to apprehend you. They know we're meeting. David looked out the window and saw black SUVs pulling up outside the coffee shop. Men in dark suits were getting out and putting on earpieces. Dr. Morrison, is there a back exit? Yes. Through the kitchen. Dr. Kim. Once we leave this coffee shop, we become fugitives. There's no going back to our normal lives. David thought about his comfortable office at the NSA. His steady paycheck. His predictable routine. Then he thought about the empty eyes of his colleagues and the way people moved like robots on the street. My normal life was helping to destroy everyone else's normal life. I can't go back to that. They slipped through the kitchen and out the back door into an alley. Behind them, David could hear the front door of the coffee shop being kicked in. Janet led him through a maze of back streets and alleys. She moved like someone who had been planning escape routes for weeks. Where are we going? To meet the others. The teacher. The fisherman's daughter. The computer expert. They're trying to get to a safe location in Montana. Someone there knows how the whole system works. Can we trust them? Dr. Kim. Right now, they're the only people in America who are still thinking for themselves. If we can't trust them, we can't trust anyone. As they walked through the shadows of Washington, D.C., David realized that everything he had believed about his job and his country was a lie. He had spent 15 years thinking he was protecting America from its enemies. Instead, he had been helping America's enemies destroy it from within. Now he was a fugitive from the very government he had served. But for the first time in months, he felt like he was actually protecting his country. The real America. The one where people could still think for themselves. At least for the next 48 hours. 200 feet beneath the streets of New York City, Tom Bradley crawled through an abandoned subway tunnel that officially didn't exist. The tunnel had been sealed off in 1975 after a cave-in, but Tom knew every hidden entrance to the city's forgotten underground world. For 15 years, since losing his apartment and his job after returning from Iraq, Tom had lived in the spaces between spaces. The abandoned platforms, the unused service tunnels, the forgotten maintenance rooms that even the transit workers had forgotten about. Most people saw Tom as just another homeless veteran. They stepped around him on the sidewalk and pretended he didn't exist. But being invisible had advantages. It meant he could see things that others missed. Like the new construction happening in places where no construction should be possible. 3 weeks ago, Tom had discovered workers installing high-tech equipment in a section of tunnel that had been abandoned for decades. They worked at night, wore no company logos, and spoke in whispers. When Tom tried to get closer, he realized they weren't regular construction workers. They moved like soldiers and carried weapons. Tonight, Tom was going back to photograph whatever they were building. He squeezed through a gap in a collapsed wall and found himself in the old pneumatic postal system tunnels. These narrow tubes had once carried mail between Manhattan buildings in the early 1900s. Now they were Tom's secret highways through the city. After 20 minutes of crawling, Tom reached his destination. A maintenance room directly above the mysterious construction site. He lifted a loose floor panel and peered down through an old ventilation grate. What he saw made his hands shake. The abandoned tunnel had been transformed into a high-tech command center. Dozens of screens showed maps of New York City, with colored dots moving across them. Each dot seemed to represent a person, and the colors changed as the dots moved through different areas. Workers in clean white suits monitored the screens and typed commands into computer terminals. Above their workstations, a large display showed numbers that kept changing. Manhattan compliance, 67%. Brooklyn compliance, 5%. Tom realized he was looking at a real-time map of how successfully they were controlling people's minds in different parts of the city. But that wasn't the scariest part. Along one wall, Tom could see massive cables running deeper into the tunnel system. The cables were thick as tree trunks and hummed with electrical energy. They disappeared into holes that had been drilled through solid rock, heading in different directions throughout the city. Tom took pictures with an old film camera he had found in the tunnels. Digital cameras could be traced, but film was invisible to electronic surveillance. As he photographed the equipment, Tom overheard a conversation between two supervisors. "Brooklyn rates are still too low," said a woman with a British accent. "The population density makes it harder for the signals to penetrate effectively." "We're installing boosters in the subway stations," replied a man with a military bearing. "By tomorrow night we should see compliance rates above 80% throughout the borough." "What about the resistance pockets in Queens?" "Mobile units are handling those. Anyone showing strong resistance indicators gets a personal visit. Most people become much more compliant after that." Tom felt sick. Personal visits. He knew what that meant from his military days. Intimidation, threats, or worse. The woman checked her watch. "How much longer until full activation?" 36 hours. "Once we activate all nodes simultaneously, we'll achieve 95% compliance citywide within 48 hours. The remaining 5% will be isolated and contained." Tom had heard enough. He needed to get this information to people who could do something about it. As he started to crawl away, his foot slipped and knocked a loose piece of metal down through the ventilation grate. The metal clanged loudly as it hit the floor of the command center below. "Security breach," someone shouted. Sound came from the ventilation system. "Send teams to check all access points." Tom heard heavy footsteps and radio chatter as security teams mobilized. He had maybe 5 minutes before they found him. He crawled as fast as he could through the pneumatic tunnels, heading for his nearest safe house, an abandoned subway car hidden in a forgotten section of track. Behind him, he could hear voices and see flashlight beams probing the tunnels. Tom made it to his hiding place with seconds to spare. The subway car looked like rusted junk from the outside, but Tom had converted the interior into a comfortable living space with battery-powered lights, a camping stove, and even internet access through a stolen Wi-Fi connection. He developed his film photos using chemicals and equipment he had salvaged from an old photography shop. As the images appeared in the developer solution, Tom realized he had documented something that could change everything. Clear photos of the command center, pictures of the compliance rate, displays, images of the massive cable network spreading throughout the city. Tom had heard about an encrypted messaging group where people were sharing information about similar discoveries across the country. Using his stolen internet connection, he downloaded the secure messaging app and found the group. The people in the group were like characters from a movie. A teacher whose students had their personalities changed, a fisherman's daughter who found artificial particles in the ocean, a computer expert who discovered government compliance databases. But they weren't characters in a movie. They were real people fighting for everyone's freedom to think. Tom posted his photos to the group along with a message. Found their NYC command center. They're tracking compliance rates in real time and plan full activation in 36 hours. The whole city will be controlled by Wednesday night. The response was immediate and frantic. Sarah, the teacher. Tom, this is incredible evidence, but are you safe? If they know someone was watching them, I'm underground, where they can't track me. Been living off-grid for 15 years, but I need to know. Are there similar command centers in other cities? Maria, the former soldier. Based on military radio chatter I've been monitoring, yes. Every major city has an underground control center. They're all connected in a network. Emma, from Maine. That explains why the ocean particles are arranged in patterns that point toward major population centers. They're part of the signal distribution system. Raj, the computer expert. Tom, the compliance percentages you photographed match the data I stole from their servers. They're using New York as a test case for urban population control. David, the NSA analyst. I just became a fugitive today. The government is actively hunting all of us. We need to meet in person to plan our next move. Tom looked at his photos again. 36 hours until full activation. After that, 95% of New York's 8 million people would lose their ability to think independently. I can guide people through the tunnel systems, Tom typed. NYC has 700 miles of tunnels, most of them unmapped and unmonitored. We could move around the city without being tracked. Maria responded, that's good, but we need to do more than hide. We need to find a way to disable their system before full activation. Sarah added, my students are already affected. If we don't stop this, every child in America will grow up unable to think for themselves. Tom stared at the compliance rate displays in his photographs. 67% of Manhattan was already under control. People walking the streets above him had no idea their thoughts and feelings weren't completely their own. He thought about his fellow veterans living on the streets. Many of them had changed over the past few months, becoming more passive and compliant. Tom had assumed they were just adjusting to life on the streets, but now he realized they were being controlled like everyone else. Even the homeless weren't free. There's something else you need to know, Tom typed. I heard them mention mobile units for people who show strong resistance. They're not just using electronic signals, they're sending teams to personally visit anyone who won't comply. David replied. What kind of visits? Tom had seen too much violence in Iraq to sugarcoat the truth. The kind where you become compliant or you disappear. The group chat went quiet for several minutes. Tom could imagine each of them sitting in their hiding places, realizing that they weren't just fighting for freedom of thought, they were fighting for their lives. Finally, Maria broke the silence. Tom, can your tunnel system connect to other cities? We need to coordinate resistance efforts, and the surface world is too dangerous now. Tom consulted his mental map of the underground. The old pneumatic systems, the abandoned transit tunnels, the forgotten utility corridors. Some of them did connect to networks in other cities. I can get messages to Philadelphia, Boston, and Washington through the old communication tunnels. Takes longer than internet, but it's completely undetectable. Emma wrote, Tom, in your photos, did you see anything that looked like it could control the ocean signals I've been tracking? Tom looked at his photos more carefully. In the background of one image, he could see a wall display showing what looked like underwater signal strength measurements. Yes, they're monitoring ocean signals too. Whatever they're doing on land connects to something in the water. Raj added, that means the network is even bigger than we thought. Land-based signals, ocean-based signals, all coordinated from command centers like the one Tom found. Tom heard footsteps above him in the main tunnel. Search teams were still looking for whoever had been watching their command center. Soon they would expand their search to the abandoned areas where Tom lived. I need to move to a deeper hiding place, he typed. But I'll keep monitoring their command center. If we're going to stop full activation, we need to understand exactly how their system works. Sarah responded, be careful, Tom. We can't afford to lose anyone else. As Tom packed his equipment and prepared to disappear deeper into the underground, he thought about the 8 million people living above him in New York City. Most of them had no idea that in 36 hours, they would lose the last bit of mental freedom they had left. But Tom knew, and he wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. He had lost his home, his job, and his place in normal society, but he still had his ability to think freely. And he was going to use that freedom to save everyone else's. Back in Millfield, Ohio, Sarah Chen stood in front of her third-grade classroom, watching 22 children who no longer seemed like children at all. They sat with perfect posture, hands folded, eyes focused straight ahead. Not one of them fidgeted or whispered or looked out the window. It had been 2 weeks since Sarah first noticed the changes. 2 weeks since she found the government document that labeled her school as Test Site 2047. Now the transformation was complete, and it was heartbreaking. Good morning, class, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice normal. Good morning, Mrs. Chen, they replied in perfect unison. Their voices had the same flat tone, the same rhythm. Like a computer program speaking through 22 different mouths, Sarah had been secretly documenting everything. Photos of their identical drawings, recordings of their similar speech patterns, videos of them moving in synchronized groups during recess. But today was different. Today she was going to try something that might be dangerous. Children, I want you to draw a picture of your dreams from last night. Usually, asking about dreams would produce excited chatter and wild stories. 8-year-olds loved talking about the crazy things that happened in their sleep. Instead, the children picked up their crayons and began drawing identical pictures. Sarah walked between the desks, looking at their artwork with growing horror. Every single drawing showed the same thing: a smiling woman in a white coat standing in front of a blackboard. The woman had kind eyes and perfect teeth. She was pointing to words written on the blackboard. Be good, be quiet, be happy. Tommy, Sarah said, kneeling beside Tommy Martinez's desk. Can you tell me about the lady in your dream? Tommy looked up with empty eyes. She teaches us how to think better, Mrs. Chen. She says our old thoughts were messy and wrong. Her new thoughts are clean and right. Sarah felt sick but forced herself to keep asking questions. What does she teach you? She teaches us that asking too many questions is bad. She teaches us that parents and teachers always know best. She teaches us that being different is wrong. Across the room, Amy Johnson raised her hand. Mrs. Chen, the nice lady says some grown-ups have messy thoughts too. She says we should tell our parents when we hear grown-ups saying wrong things. Sarah's blood turned cold. The children were being turned into informants against their own families. Amy, what kind of wrong things? When grown-ups complain about the government. When grown-ups say they don't trust the news. When grown-ups ask too many questions about things they don't understand. Sarah realized she was looking at the future of America. Children who would report their own parents for thinking independently. Children who would grow up unable to question authority or think for themselves. During lunch break, Sarah called her brother Marcus using the school's landline. Marcus, it's getting worse. The children are being programmed to spy on their families. Sarah, you need to get out of there. I've been monitoring radio chatter from truckers across the country. They're moving to the final phase early. Something about resistance forces that they need to eliminate first. I can't leave the children. Sarah, listen to me. There are military convoys heading towards small towns like Millfield. They're not coming to help. They're coming to make sure everyone complies with the program. Sarah looked through the cafeteria window at her students sitting in perfect rows, eating their lunch in complete silence. How much time do we have? Maybe 24 hours. After that, anyone who isn't compliant will be taken to adjustment facilities. Sarah knew what that meant. Concentration camps for people who could still think freely. That afternoon, Sarah tried one more experiment. She asked her students to write stories about what they wanted to be when they grew up. 2 months ago, she would have received stories about becoming astronauts, artists, musicians, and inventors. Children who dreamed of exploring space, creating beautiful things, and changing the world. Instead, every story was the same. I want to be good. I want to follow rules. I want to help everyone be the same. Not one child mentioned creativity, adventure, or making the world better. They had been programmed to want nothing more than compliance. After school, Sarah sat alone in her classroom and cried. These weren't her students anymore. They were robots wearing children's faces. Her secure phone buzzed with messages from the resistance group. Tom had found command centers under New York City. Emma's ocean particles were getting stronger. David and Janet were running from NSA teams. Maria was coordinating escape routes through Montana. And Sarah was sitting in a classroom full of children whose minds had been stolen. She typed a message to the group. The children are completely changed now. They're being used to spy on their families. But I think I know something that might help us. Emma responded, What do you mean? The children remember their dreams in perfect detail, but they don't remember much about their normal lives anymore. It's like the dream program is replacing their real memories. Raj joined the conversation. That makes sense. If you can control someone's memories, you can control how they think about everything. Sarah continued typing. But here's the important part. The children all have the same dream at exactly the same time. 3 a.m. every night. That means the signal has to be transmitted at a specific time. Maria added, That matches what I'm hearing on military radio. They coordinate all transmissions to happen simultaneously for maximum effect. David wrote, Sarah, this is crucial information. If we can disrupt the 3 a.m. transmission, we might be able to break the program's hold on the children. Tom added from his underground hideout. The command center I'm watching shows transmission schedules. Everything coordinates through a master timing system. Sarah looked at her students' drawings again. The smiling woman in the white coat appeared in every single picture. But in Tommy's drawing, Sarah noticed something the others had missed. Behind the woman, barely visible in the background, Tommy had drawn what looked like a control room with computers and screens. It was just a few crayon lines, but it showed that some part of Tommy's real mind was still observing and remembering. There's something else, Sarah typed. I think part of their original personalities is still there, buried under the programming. One of my students drew details that the program probably didn't want him to see. Emma wrote, You mean they might be able to fight back? Maybe. But we'd need to find a way to wake up their real minds without the program detecting it. Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly closed her phone and pretended to grade papers as Principal Davidson walked into her classroom. Mrs. Chen, I wanted to commend you on the improvement in your students' behavior. They're so much more manageable now. Principal Davidson looked different too. His eyes had the same empty quality as the children. His smile seemed fake and practiced. Thank you, Principal Davidson. They've certainly become very compliant. Yes. Compliance is so important for learning. By the way, I need you to fill out this form about any unusual observations you've made recently. The district wants to make sure we're identifying any students or families who might need additional support. Sarah looked at the form. It was asking for information about children who seemed resistant to the behavioral changes. Children whose families asked too many questions. Children who might need special intervention. They were asking her to identify targets for elimination. Of course, Principal Davidson. I'll have this completed by tomorrow. After he left, Sarah stared at the form. She had a choice to make. She could fill out the form honestly and condemn resistant children and their families to whatever special intervention meant. Or she could lie and risk being discovered. But there was a third option. She could use the form to warn families that they were in danger. Sarah spent the evening visiting the homes of her students. At each house, she found parents who were concerned but confused about their children's changes. Mrs. Rodriguez, Miguel is on a list of children who need special help from the government. I think you should take him to visit his grandmother in Mexico for a few weeks. Mr. Thompson, Billy's behavior changes aren't normal. Something is affecting children across the country. You might want to keep him home from school and limit his screen time. House after house. Sarah warned parents without telling them the full truth. Most of them listened because they trusted her judgment. A few thought she was overreacting. By midnight, Sarah had warned 15 families. Some were already packing to leave town. As she drove home, Sarah noticed military vehicles parked at the edge of town. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted people to see them and feel intimidated. Her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Maria. All resistance members need to evacuate immediately. Final phase starts in 12 hours. After that, anyone not in the system will be considered an enemy combatant. Sarah looked at her small house where she had lived for 10 years. Her comfortable bed, her books, her photographs of students from happier times. She packed a single bag and left Millfield, Ohio forever. As she drove toward the coordinates Maria had provided for their meeting place, Sarah passed the elementary school, where she had taught for a decade. The parking lot was full of military vehicles now. Tomorrow, when her students arrived at school, she wouldn't be there to protect them. But maybe, if the resistance could find a way to break the program, those children might have a chance to remember who they used to be. In her rearview mirror, Sarah watched the lights of Millfield disappear. Somewhere behind her, 22 third graders were sleeping peacefully, dreaming the same dream about a smiling woman who was stealing their souls. Sarah drove through the night toward coordinates Maria had given her, a remote area in Montana where cell towers couldn't reach and satellites couldn't see clearly. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she thought about her students, but she forced herself to focus on the road ahead. At the same time, 300 miles away, Emma Brennan crept through the Maine woods behind her college campus. She had been hiding for 2 days, living on berries and stream water while teams with dogs searched for her. But Emma wasn't just running anymore. She was gathering final proof. During the day, while search teams rested, Emma returned to the coast with equipment she had borrowed from the marine biology lab. The silver particles in the ocean were stronger now, forming complex patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. Emma collected water samples from different depths and locations. Under her portable microscope, she watched the particles move in perfect coordination. They weren't just floating in the water. They were communicating with each other and with something on land. Using an old radio her father had taught her to operate, Emma tracked the particles' signals. The frequencies matched exactly with transmission times from the underground command centers Tom had discovered in New York. Ocean signals and land signals, all synchronized, all part of the same massive network. Emma typed an encrypted message to the group. The ocean particles activate exactly 30 minutes before the 3 a.m. land transmissions. They're preparing the coastal populations for the main signal. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Arizona, Dr. Raj Patel sat in the back of a stolen delivery truck, surrounded by computer equipment he had rescued from his office. He was no longer the respectable scientist who had worked for Dataflow Security. Now he was a fugitive with a laptop, a generator, and a desperate plan to hack into the government's mind control system. Raj had been tracking data flows across the internet for weeks, mapping the digital backbone of Project Mindbridge. He had discovered that every transmission was coordinated through a single master server located somewhere in Virginia. If he could find that server and disrupt it during the final activation, he might be able to crash the entire network. But first, he had to stay alive long enough to try. Government agents had been tracking him across 3 states. Every time Raj tried to settle somewhere and work, black SUVs would appear within hours. They were following him through credit card transactions, traffic cameras, and cell phone towers. So Raj had become invisible. He paid for everything with cash he had withdrawn before fleeing Phoenix. He traveled in stolen vehicles that couldn't be traced to him. He used only throwaway phones and public Wi-Fi connections. From his mobile command center in the delivery truck, Raj sent updates to the group. "I'm getting closer to finding their master server. The final activation is controlled from a single location. If we can physically destroy that server during the transmission, we might be able to free everyone at once." In Washington, D.C., David Kim and Dr. Janet Morrison moved through the city like ghosts. They had fake identification documents that David had created using skills from his NSA training. During the day, they looked like ordinary government workers. At night, they became intelligence gatherers for the resistance. David used his knowledge of government operations to predict where key facilities might be hidden. Janet used her medical training to document how the mind control technology was affecting different population groups. Together, they had discovered something terrifying. The government wasn't just controlling minds. It was experimenting with different levels of control on different groups of people. Children received the strongest programming because their brains were most adaptable. Adults in rural areas received moderate programming that made them compliant, but not completely empty. Adults in major cities received lighter programming that reduced their curiosity and independence without making obvious changes. It was a carefully calibrated system designed to control the entire population without making people realize they were being controlled. David sent encrypted updates to the group. Janet and I found classified medical reports about the programming levels. Children like Sarah's students received maximum programming that completely replaces their personalities. Most adults are receiving partial programming that leaves them functional but compliant. The system is designed to look natural. In the tunnels beneath New York City, Tom Bradley had become the Resistance's eyes and ears inside the enemy's command structure. He spent his days watching the underground control center, documenting shift changes, security procedures, and technical operations. Tom had discovered that the New York facility was one of 12 master control centers spread across the country. Each center controlled signals for a specific region. If all 12 centers activated simultaneously, they could control the minds of 300 million Americans within 48 hours. But Tom had also found a weakness in their system. The centers had to be synchronized perfectly to work properly. If even one center went offline during activation, it would create a gap in coverage that could spread and crash the entire network. Tom sent tactical intelligence to the group. I've identified the weak point. The centers are like dominoes. If one falls at the right moment, they all fall. But the timing has to be perfect. We have to hit them during the activation sequence, not before or after. As dawn approached, all 5 resistance members were racing toward Maria's coordinates in Montana. Sarah drove her car until the roads became too small, then continued on foot. Emma kayaked across a remote lake to avoid road checkpoints. Rage abandoned his delivery truck and hiked through desert terrain. David and Janet traveled in a medical supply truck that Janet had borrowed from a sympathetic colleague. Tom was the last to leave, after gathering final intelligence from the New York Command Center. He had overheard the most important conversation yet. Final activation begins at exactly 8 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. All centers will coordinate the transmission. By midnight, we'll have 95% compliance nationwide. Any remaining resistance will be isolated and eliminated. Tom sent one final message before abandoning his underground position. 18 hours until final activation. After 8 p.m. tomorrow, it will be too late to save anyone. The race was no longer just against time. It was against the complete loss of human freedom in America. High in the Montana mountains, Maria Santos waited at a cabin that hadn't appeared on any map for 50 years. She had chosen this location because it was one of the few places in America where the government's signals couldn't reach. Maria had been monitoring military communications all night. The chatter was intense now, with units being deployed to every major city and town in the country. The government was preparing for the largest mind control operation in human history. But Maria had also heard something else in the communications that gave her hope. Some military units were reporting equipment malfunctions and personnel who refused orders. Not everyone in the government was willing to participate in stealing America's freedom. There were still people inside the system who were fighting back. As the sun rose over the Montana wilderness, Maria saw smoke signals from different directions. Her old military training had taught her dozens of ways to communicate without electronics. Sarah, Emma, Raj, David, and Tom were all approaching through different routes, using methods that couldn't be detected or intercepted. Within hours, they would all be together for the first time. 5 ordinary Americans who had discovered pieces of the same horrible puzzle. A teacher who loved her students too much to let their minds be stolen. A young woman who cared too much about the ocean to ignore what was poisoning it. A computer expert who believed technology should help people, not control them. A government analyst who couldn't stand by while his own agency destroyed freedom. An urban explorer who had seen too much to remain silent. Together, they had 16 hours to do what the entire American government seemed unable or unwilling to do: protect the right of 300 million people to think for themselves. The final battle for America's mind was about to begin. At exactly noon, 5 exhausted Americans sat around a wooden table in Maria's hidden Montana cabin. None of them had slept in days. All of them were being hunted by their own government. But for the first time since discovering the conspiracy, they weren't alone. Sarah looked at the faces around the table. Emma, with dirt on her clothes from hiding in the Maine woods. Raj, with his hands shaking from too much coffee and fear. David, still wearing his government ID badge from his former life. Tom, carrying the smell of underground tunnels on his jacket. "We have 8 hours," Maria said, spreading maps and documents across the table. 8 hours to save 300 million people from losing their minds forever. Emma placed her ocean water samples in the center of the table. Under Maria's microscope, they could all see the silver particles moving in perfect patterns, like tiny soldiers following orders. "The ocean signals start at 7:30 p.m., Emma said. "They prepare coastal populations for the main transmission at 8. Raj opened his laptop and showed them the data he had stolen from government servers. "I've located the master control server. It's in a facility outside Richmond, Virginia. All 12 regional centers take their timing from this one location." Tom pulled out his photographs of the New York command center. "The regional centers have to synchronize perfectly. If we can disrupt the timing during activation, the whole system crashes." David spread out building plans he had memorized during his NSA years. The Richmond facility is underground like all the others. Heavy security, but there are weak points in every system. Maria looked at each of them. "Here's what we're gonna do. We can't attack all 12 centers, there are only 5 of us. But we don't need to. If Raj is right about the master server, we hit Richmond during the activation sequence. How do we get inside a heavily guarded government facility?" Sarah asked. David smiled grimly. "I still have my security clearance. It hasn't been revoked yet. They want to capture me, not expose me. I can get us through the first layers of security." "What about the deeper levels?" Emma asked. Tom pointed to the building plans. "Every underground facility has maintenance tunnels for utilities. I've been living in tunnels for 15 years. I can find a way in." Raj pulled up more data on his laptop. "Once we're inside, I need direct access to their main server room. I've written a virus that should crash their entire network, but I have to upload it during the activation sequence when all the systems are connected." Maria stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, she could see helicopters searching the mountains. "They're getting closer. We need to leave now." The 5 Americans grabbed their equipment and scattered to different vehicles. Maria had arranged 3 cars and 2 motorcycles, all stolen or borrowed from people who lived off the grid. As they drove down separate mountain roads toward Virginia, each of them understood that this was probably a suicide mission. The Richmond facility would be protected by dozens of armed guards, electronic security systems, and military backup units. But they also understood that if they failed, America would become a nation of people who couldn't think for themselves. Children would grow up without curiosity or creativity. Adults would follow orders without question. Democracy would become meaningless, because citizens would no longer be capable of independent thought. The drive to Virginia took 6 hours. Sarah and Emma traveled together, taking back roads and avoiding major highways. Raj drove alone, stopping frequently to check government communications and make sure they weren't being tracked. David and Janet, who had joined them at the last minute, used Janet's medical credentials to pass through several checkpoints. Tom and Maria rode motorcycles through forest paths and abandoned railway tracks. At 6:30 p.m., they regrouped at an abandoned gas station 15 miles from the Richmond facility. The sun was setting, and they had 90 minutes before the ocean signals began. Maria gathered everyone around the detailed plans David had drawn from memory. "The facility is built into a hillside," Maria explained. "The main entrance looks like a normal office building, but the real operations are 5 levels underground. Tom will enter through the utility tunnels here." She pointed to a spot behind the building. "David and Janet will use the front entrance with medical credentials. Janet is supposedly delivering emergency psychiatric drugs for the staff." "What about Sarah and Emma?" Raj asked. "We'll create diversions at 2 security checkpoints," Sarah said. "Nothing violent, just enough confusion to draw attention away from the others." "And me?" Raj asked. Maria pointed to a ventilation shaft on the building plans. "You're going in through the air system. It's the only route that leads directly to the server room without passing through multiple security checkpoints." Rage looked at the narrow shaft with obvious fear. I'm not exactly an action hero. Tom patted his shoulder. Neither was I before I learned to live underground. You'll be fine. Just remember, we're not trying to be heroes. We're trying to save everyone else from losing their minds. At 7:15 p.m., they began their operation. Sarah and Emma drove to the facility's north checkpoint and staged a minor car accident. As security guards rushed to help, they complained loudly about being lost tourists looking for a hotel. The guards were polite, but firm about directing them away from the restricted area. It's working, Emma whispered as they saw guards calling for assistance to deal with the tourist situation. At 7:20 p.m., David and Janet approached the main entrance in their medical vehicle. David's NSA badge and Janet's medical credentials got them through the first security checkpoint without question. Dr. Morrison here has emergency medications for staff members showing signs of stress-related breakdown, David told the guards. Some of your people have been working very long hours on classified projects. The guards nodded knowingly. They had all heard rumors about researchers having nervous breakdowns from the pressure of their secret work. At 7:25 p.m., Tom crawled through a drainage tunnel that led to the facility's utility systems. His years of underground living had taught him to move silently through spaces most people couldn't even fit through. He found the electrical systems and began setting up devices Maria had given him, small explosive charges that would create power failures at exactly the right moment. At 7:30 p.m., as Emma's ocean particles began their synchronized activation along the Atlantic coast, Raj squeezed through an air ventilation shaft toward the server room. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Dust and debris made it hard to breathe, but through the ventilation grates, he could see into the facility's operations center. Dozens of technicians sat at computer terminals, monitoring displays that showed real-time data from across the country. Maps displayed compliance percentages for every city and town in America. Status reports showed the readiness of all 12 regional control centers. Ocean phase initiation complete, someone announced. Coastal population preparation at 94% efficiency. Land-based systems charging to full power, another technician reported. Activation in T-minus 25 minutes. Raj crawled faster through the shaft. He had 25 minutes to reach the server room and upload his virus during the brief window when all systems would be connected for the final activation. At 7:35 p.m., Tom's explosives created electrical failures that triggered emergency lighting in 3 sections of the building. Security teams rushed to investigate what looked like equipment malfunction. David and Janet used the confusion to access a stairwell leading to the underground levels. Janet's medical bag contained more than medications. It held communication devices, computer equipment, and tools Maria had provided. Level 3, David whispered as they descended. The server room should be on level 5. At 7:40 p.m., Sarah and Emma escalated their diversion by reporting a gas leak they claimed to smell near the facility. Emergency crews arrived to investigate, drawing even more security personnel away from their posts. I don't smell anything, one guard said. Gas leaks are odorless until they reach dangerous levels, Emma replied, using her marine biology knowledge to sound convincing. We learned about this in environmental safety training. At 7:45 p.m., Raj reached a ventilation grate directly above the server room. Through the metal slats, he could see rows of massive computer servers humming with electrical power. Technicians were running final checks on the systems that would steal the minds of 300 million Americans in 15 minutes. Rage carefully removed the grate and lowered himself into the room. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure someone would hear it. At 7:50 p.m., Tom's second round of explosives created more electrical failures. The facility's emergency systems were working overtime, and security teams were spread thin trying to manage multiple equipment problems. David and Janet reached level 5 and found the server room corridor. 2 guards stood at the entrance, but they were distracted by radio reports about the various emergencies happening throughout the building. The psychiatric medications need to be delivered to the technical staff immediately, Janet told the guards. Some of your people are showing signs of severe stress reactions. If they collapse during a critical operation, it could jeopardize everything. One guard looked uncertain. I haven't received authorization for medical personnel in the server area. Then call your supervisor, David said with authority. But if someone has a mental breakdown during your activation sequence, it won't be our responsibility. At 7:55 p.m., Raj connected his laptop to the main server and began uploading his virus. The program was designed to crash the entire network by sending conflicting timing signals to all 12 regional centers. But as his virus uploaded, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Unauthorized access detected in server room Alpha, announced an automated voice. Security breach in progress. Lockdown initiated. The server room doors slammed shut. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. Armed security teams began converging on level 5. Upload progress. 60%. Raj whispered into his communication device. I need more time. At 7:57 p.m., Tom set off his largest explosive charge, creating a power failure that affected the entire facility. Emergency generators kicked in, but the disruption bought them precious seconds. Sarah and Emma heard the explosion and the alarms. Their diversion was no longer necessary. The facility was in chaos. At 7:58 p.m., David and Janet found themselves trapped between security teams and locked doors. They could hear Raj desperately trying to complete his upload on the other side of the steel barrier. Upload progress 85%, Raj reported. Security teams are cutting through the door. I can see them. At 7:59 p.m., as the final minute before activation began, Tom reached the facility's main power systems and prepared to shut down electricity to the entire building. Maria's voice crackled through their communication devices from her position outside the facility. Final activation begins in 60 seconds. Whatever you're going to do it now. The 5 Americans who had started as strangers were now fighting together in the final moments before their government would steal the minds of everyone they had ever loved. Success or failure would be decided in the next 60 seconds. At exactly 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time, as 300 million Americans sat down to dinner or settled in to watch evening television, Raj's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard in the locked server room. The upload bar showed 92%. Security teams were cutting through the steel door with blowtorches, sparks flying everywhere. Upload at 95%. Raj whispered into his communication device. 10 more seconds. Outside the server room, David and Janet pressed themselves against the wall as armed guards rushed past them. Through the chaos, they could hear countdown announcements echoing through the facility. Final activation commencing. All regional centers report ready status. Ocean signal boost at maximum power. 3 levels above them, Tom reached the main electrical panel for the entire facility. His hand hovered over the master switch that would plunge the building into darkness, but he needed to wait for exactly the right moment. Too early and they would restart their systems, too late and the activation would be complete. Upload at 98%. Raj reported. The blowtorch had cut halfway through the door. Outside the facility, Sarah and Emma watched through binoculars as military helicopters circled overhead. They had created enough confusion to help their friends get inside, but now there was nothing more they could do except wait and hope. Emma's hands shook as she held her radio. The ocean particles she had been tracking were pulsing with massive energy. Along the entire Atlantic coast, the signals were preparing millions of minds for the final program that would steal their ability to think freely. Upload at 99%. Raj whispered. The security door was almost cut through. He could see armed men preparing to rush into the room. At that exact moment, in operations centers buried beneath 12 major American cities, technicians began the final sequence that would turn the United States into a nation of people who couldn't question authority, couldn't think creatively, and couldn't resist government control. New York Center ready. Los Angeles Center ready. Chicago Center ready. Miami Center ready. One by one, the regional centers reported their readiness to steal the minds of every American citizen. Upload complete. Raj announced as his virus finished transferring into the government's master server. Virus active. At that same instant, the security door burst open and armed guards poured into the server room, their weapons aimed at Raj. But it was too late to stop what he had done. Raj's virus spread through the government's network like wildfire, sending conflicting timing signals to all 12 regional centers. Instead of synchronized activation that would control minds, the centers received chaotic instructions that crashed their systems one by one. New York Center experiencing critical error. Los Angeles Center offline. Chicago Center system failure. Throughout the Richmond facility, alarms blared as the master control system collapsed. Computer screens flickered and went dark. The countdown to mental enslavement stopped at 8. Tom threw the master electrical switch, plunging the entire facility into emergency lighting. In the darkness and confusion, David and Janet helped Raj escape through the ventilation system, while security teams struggled to restore power and understand what had happened. But as the 5 resistance members regrouped at their emergency meeting point outside Richmond, they discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about their mission. The virus had worked too well. Maria's military radio crackled with communications from government units across the country. What they heard was not the victory they had expected. Control. This is Eagle 7. Regional systems are offline, but partial activation was successful. Estimates 60% of target population affected before system crash. Confirmed. Eagle 7. Phoenix shows 72% affected. Denver shows 55% affected. Boston shows 68% affected. Sarah stared at the radio in horror. What does that mean? We stopped the activation. Maria's face was grim. We stopped full activation. But the system was already running for months. The crash happened after partial activation was complete. Emma checked her ocean monitoring equipment. The silver particles were still active, still pulsing with coordinated signals. The ocean network is still running. We only crashed the land-based systems. Raj pulled up data on his laptop from backup servers he had hacked weeks earlier. What he found made his hands shake. The compliance percentages from before the crash, they're not going down. People who were already affected are staying affected. David used his NSA training to analyze the communications they were intercepting. It's worse than that. The government is calling this a partial success. They're planning to rebuild the crashed systems and complete the activation within weeks. Tom looked at his photographs from the New York Command Center. Even in the emergency lighting during their escape, he had seen technicians working frantically to restore their equipment. They have backup systems, multiple redundancies. We damaged them, but we didn't destroy them. The 5 Americans sat in stunned silence as the truth of their situation became clear. They had struck a blow against the conspiracy, but they hadn't defeated it. Across America, millions of people were still under mental control, and millions more would be brought under control as soon as the systems were repaired. But there was something else, something even more terrifying that none of them had expected. As reports came in from around the country, a horrifying picture emerged of what America looked like after partial activation. Families were split down the middle. In some households, parents had been affected while children remained free. In others, children had been programmed while parents struggled to understand why their kids had changed. Husbands and wives found themselves on opposite sides of an invisible war for human consciousness. The affected people didn't know they had been changed. They believed their new thoughts and feelings were completely natural. When their unaffected family members tried to convince them something was wrong, the affected people became confused and defensive. Sarah received heartbreaking messages from parents in Millfield, whose children had been completely programmed. The parents wanted to help their kids, but the children now reported any wrong thinking to authorities. Families were being torn apart by an invisible enemy that lived inside people's minds. Emma discovered that coastal communities had been affected more severely because of the ocean signal network. Entire towns now moved in synchronized patterns, thought identical thoughts, and couldn't imagine questioning authority. David learned that government employees in affected areas had become perfect bureaucrats who followed every rule without question. Democracy was becoming impossible because many elected officials could no longer think independently about policy decisions. But the most shocking discovery came when Maria decoded military communications about what the government was planning next. Operation Mindbridge was never meant to be a one-time activation, Maria announced, her voice hollow. It was designed as a permanent system. They're going to keep running the signals until every American is affected. The partial activation was actually their preferred approach. It's less noticeable than changing everyone at once. Raj looked at the data flowing across his laptop screen. They're already rebuilding the crashed systems. New equipment is being installed in the damaged regional centers. They'll be back online within 72 hours. Tom studied his maps of underground facilities. And they're building more centers. I saw construction reports for 15 additional sites. They're expanding the network, not just repairing it. Sarah thought about her students, programmed to spy on their families and report independent thinking. This isn't just about mind control anymore. They're creating a society where free thought becomes impossible. where children grow up unable to imagine questioning authority. Emma looked at her ocean data, tracking the silver particles that continued to pulse with malevolent purpose, and they've learned from our attack. The new systems will have better security, more redundancy, stronger signals. David accessed classified reports that painted a picture of the conspiracy's true scope. This technology has been tested in other countries over the past decade. Those populations are now completely compliant. Their citizens don't protest, don't question government decisions, don't create art or literature that challenges authority. They've become nations of people who can't think freely. The 5 resistance members looked at each other across the table in their hidden Montana cabin. They had fought harder than they ever thought possible, risked everything they had, and struck a blow against the most powerful government in the world. But they had only delayed the inevitable, not stopped it. Maria broke the silence. We need to understand what we're really fighting. This isn't just an American conspiracy. The reports David found show similar operations in dozens of countries. This is a global effort to end human freedom of thought. Who's behind it? Sarah asked. It can't just be our government. Raj pulled up financial data he had discovered during his hacking. It's a partnership between intelligence agencies and private corporations in multiple countries. Companies that want consumers who don't question their products. Governments that want citizens who don't question their policies. They're working together to create a world where independent thinking is extinct. Emma studied the coordination patterns in her ocean data. The timing of the signals suggests they're all controlled from a central location outside the United States. Somewhere they think they're safe from resistance. Tom looked at construction reports from around the world. They've been building this network for 15 years. Underground facilities on every continent. Ocean signal stations in international waters. Satellite networks that can't be reached by any one government. David accessed intelligence reports about the conspiracy's ultimate timeline. According to classified documents, they plan to achieve global compliance within 5 years. After that, human beings will no longer be capable of revolution, rebellion, or independent thought. The resistance members sat in the growing darkness of the Montana mountains, understanding finally what they were truly up against. This wasn't a battle to save America. It was a battle to save the human ability to think freely anywhere in the world. Sarah looked around the table at the 4 people who had become her closest allies in the fight for human consciousness. So what do we do now? Maria checked her military communications equipment. Around the world, similar resistance groups were forming in other countries. People who had noticed the changes, who had discovered pieces of the conspiracy, who refused to surrender their minds. Now we connect with every other group fighting this. We share what we've learned. We prepare for a longer war than we expected. Emma gathered her ocean research data. The signals are getting stronger every day. We need to find the source, the central control system that coordinates everything. Raj began scanning for other resistance hackers around the world. If we can network our technical skills globally, maybe we can find vulnerabilities in their system that no single group could find alone. Tom studied maps of underground resistance networks that were forming in major cities. People are waking up, not many yet, but enough. The resistance is spreading. David accessed intelligence networks that he could still penetrate with his NSA training. I can provide early warning when they plan their next activation. Give us time to coordinate counterattacks. As dawn broke over the Montana wilderness, 5 Americans realized that their fight to save 22 third graders in a small Ohio town had become part of a global war to save human consciousness itself. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. Across America, millions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that their thoughts and feelings were no longer completely their own. Children who had been programmed to report their parents' wrong thinking. Adults who had lost the ability to question authority. Entire communities moving in synchronized patterns like human puppets. But in hidden places around the world, small groups of people who could still think freely were connecting, sharing information, and preparing to fight back. The conspiracy had succeeded in partially enslaving the American mind. But they had also created something they hadn't expected. A global resistance movement, united by the shared understanding that the ability to think freely was worth any sacrifice to preserve. The war for human consciousness would be fought not just in America but on every continent, in every country where people still remembered what it meant to be mentally free. And it would be fought by ordinary people like Sarah, Emma, Raj, David, and Tom. People who loved freedom more than safety, who asked questions instead of accepting easy answers, and who refused to surrender the most precious thing human beings possess: the ability to think for themselves. The future of human freedom now depended on whether enough people around the world would choose to join the resistance before it was too late to resist at all. The future of human freedom now rests in the hands of people like Sarah, Emma, Raj, David, and Tom. And people like you who choose to think freely and ask important questions. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Drop a comment and let me know what country or state you're in. It's always amazing to connect with viewers from all around the world. If you enjoyed this story and found it thought-provoking, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who appreciate these kinds of deep, engaging stories. And don't forget to subscribe for many more interesting videos like this one. We explore stories that make you think, question, and see the world from new perspectives. Most importantly, please share this video with your friends and family. In a world where it's easy to accept things at face value, we need to spread kindness and awareness by encouraging the people we care about to think critically and stay curious. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.